China is, to this day, the second biggest country in the entire world, home to over 1.3 billion people. Its history is riddled with many surprising events, intriguing figures, and gross facts. I'm Jake, the Voice Pa, and these are 10 facts you probably didn't know about China! In ancient China, men were attracted to women with small feet. Some unlucky young girls were forced to tuck their toes underneath their feet, which were held in place with cloth. This was called foot binding. Over the course of a few years, the foot would have shrunk down to a mere 3 or 4 inches. It was mandatory for wealthy upper-class women to bind their feet. It deformed their feet and even broke their bones. This painful procedure was finally branded illegal in the beginning of the 20th century. Anyone with a weak stomach might want to avoid visiting China. Their market stalls are filled with some bizarre foods. Not only do they serve seahorses and crabs, as well as deep-fried spiders and scorpions, you can dine on sheep genitals on a stick. Chicken testicles come with a dollop of rice and broth. Duck beaks and cooked chicks are also available, much like boiled monkey brains and stinky pieces of tofu. Perhaps just a bowl of rice will suffice. China's list of inventions is broad and extensive. For example, kites were invented and used for communication, testing wind, and even scaring enemies in battle with their special dragon kites. On top of that, the Chinese invented ice cream, the repeater crossbow, poison gases, gunpowder, paper, soccer, and much, much more. Most of these were invented hundreds of years before the West even picked up on them. Even toilet paper was created by the Chinese. This was a luxury reserved only for emperors in the 14th century, so be sure to thank them during your next toilet trip. It goes without saying that the empires of China were all home to some remarkably talented and intelligent figures, as seen by their inventions alone. Alas, some of the country's most prominent creations were actually invented by other countries. Fortune cookies were originally a Japanese invention from the 19th century. The small handheld fortune cookies was popularized in America during the mid-20th century by the San Francisco-based Ki Hyong Noodle Factory. Ping pong was not a Chinese invention either. This sport was created by the British under the name table tennis. It was so popular with the Chinese, it ended up being implemented in the Olympics in 1988. Compared to some of the amazing things they did create, these seem trivial in comparison. Not merely content with armor made of metal and leather, China was said to have invented paper armor around 600 BC. Resins were used on thick layers of paper to help toughen it up. Believe it or not, paper armor was surprisingly effective, and it was just as durable as heavy armor in many ways. It could withstand arrows, sword slashes, bullets from primitive firearms at the time, and more. However, it fared poorly against blunt weapons, and was far from waterproof. And you thought paper was only good for doodling on. Some of China's emperors were record breakers. For example, the youngest ever emperor was Shang of the Han Dynasty, who sadly died at age 2. Qianlong of the Qin Dynasty ruled for 6 whole decades and died at age 89. Surprisingly, there was one female emperor in the country's entire history. Wu Zetian was the oldest person to have ascended to the throne at age 67 in 1692 BC, and ruled for over 50 years. It was rumored that she bumped off her family to seize power, though this has been disputed by historians. Communism is an oppressive political movement that has resulted in millions of deaths throughout history. During Mao Zedong's reign, he caused almost 45 million deaths across less than half a decade. Yet, the founder of the People's Republic of China was praised as a god by his followers. The chairman believed having as much sex as possible would help combat old age. He brought in peasant girls daily, and after they read up on a sex manual, well, you know. Many of the girls were incredibly humbled to sleep with their leader and didn't even mind contracting STDs. Shockingly, Mao even had an underage mistress at age 69. The girl, known as Chen, was only 14 years old. She was a singer and dancer who ended up in a relationship with the chairman for 5 years, until Mao's mistress got sick and tired of what was going on. This broke the chairman's heart, though the whole fiasco was kept under wraps. Everyone loves a good story, and the Chinese had plenty of them. According to Chinese mythology, millions of years ago, a god named Pangu was resting inside an egg. The yin and yang within created the sky and earth. Pangu kept both in balance with his mere hands and feet. Fengshen Yanyi wrote a book of Chinese legends called An Investiture of the Gods in the 16th century. One was based on Da Ji, a monarch who enjoyed brutally torturing people for her own pleasure, going so far as to slowly roast them alive. Yanyi wrote how she was a shape-shifting fox who was promised immortality by the goddess Nuwa if she overthrew the king. She was punished with death instead. If you're ever in need of a fascinating tale, read up on some old Chinese legends. In order to avoid bloodshed, some resort to psychological torture in order to extract information from a captive. Chinese water torture may seem pretty harmless on paper, though in reality, it was particularly heinous. First documented in the 16th century, though no one is sure when it was first created, it was reported that the victim would be tied down to an uncomfortable chair underneath a bucket of water. This would slowly drip cold water on the victim's head. It sounds harmless, but remember, the prisoner is unable to move and cannot resist. On occasions, the Chinese would punish them by using said torture method in public to add to the humiliation. Victims would become frustrated with each drip, sending gradually heavier vibrations through their skull. Ulcers would grow on their scalps as a result. Chinese water torture may be the simplest but cruelest means of torture ever. The Second World War was arguably the most horrific event in human history. While historians tend to focus on the battles fought between Nazi Germany and its comrades against the Allies and Soviets, few seem to pay attention to China's role in the conflict. Surprising, considering over 14 million Chinese lost their lives. China fell victim to the Nanking Massacre in 1937, when Japanese soldiers invaded their land to commit mass rape and genocide. The exact death toll is unknown since Japan destroyed all evidence of the massacre. After this, China was suffering from a civil war between its nationalist and communist supporters. Few seem to offer credit to China for their participation in the war. They defended their own country from Japanese attacks, fought alongside the British and Americans in Burma, helped escort British shipments. Yet, all in all, the country ultimately fell victim to numerous bloodbaths, and after years of being trapped within a tug-of-war contest between the nationalists and communists, it fell under communist rule a few years after the end of the war. Their efforts delivered a crucial blow against the Axis powers. After all, if they folded, Japan would have a much greater army to battle the Americans or even the Soviets with. Those then are 10 facts you probably didn't know about China. For more top lists just like this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Don't forget to check out our other top lists. Thank you very much for watching, and thanks for learning.